What if you could make a full pasta sauce with nothing but water and a spoon? This used to be one of the most useful prepper ingredients ever, until it disappeared overnight. Hey guys, it's Jera with Wicked Prepared. When Thrive Life went out of business, one of the most useful pantry ingredients ever disappeared overnight. Thrive Life's tomato sauce mix was one of my absolutely favorite pantry ingredients ever because there was literally nothing else like it out there in existence. Sure, there are seasoning mixes to make spaghetti sauce, but you need to add them to your own canned tomato products to get the actual complete sauce. Thrive's was a complete mix, a tomato sauce mix where you just add water and instantly have basically marinara sauce, spaghetti sauce, a seasoned tomato sauce. How many of you like having shelf-stable sauce mixes in your pantry? Or do you prefer to make sauces from scratch? Or maybe a little bit of both? Let me know down in the comments. I'm a little bit of both kind of girl. I love cooking from scratch, but I also love convenience mixes for those days that I just don't have time. I use Thrive's tomato sauce for so many things, including a lot of my meal in a jar recipes, as did other recipe creators. So if you're someone who makes a lot of meals in a jar like I do, losing this mix meant that a lot of those recipes basically became useless. It had other benefits besides meals in a jar as well, though. It was a pantry space saver because a half a cup of mix could make over 2 cups of sauce. So that could actually save you 75% of valuable shelf space in your pantry over storing the sauce itself, as long as you have access to water. The shelf life also was longer than a can or a jar of spaghetti sauce, and you could use just what you needed without worrying about the rest of the container going bad. This was one of my favorite reasons to use the mix because I have teenagers who love to make themselves a bowl of pasta for a snack or a quick meal. But that often led to open jars of sauce getting lost in the wilds of my refrigerator, only to resurface weeks later spoiled, full of mold, and headed straight for the trash. That's like throwing money away. With a mix like this, if you need a single serving of sauce, you just mix up a single serving and the rest stays good on the shelf. I searched everywhere for a replacement for this mix and I couldn't find anything like it. So I decided to recreate it. And while I was at it, I also started experimenting with a few other shelf-stable sauce mixes too, including a rich and delicious instant Alfredo sauce mix. To me, dry mixes like these bridge that gap between convenience foods and homemade cooking from scratch. So today I'm going to show you exactly how to make them. And if you stick around, there just might be a little bonus recipe thrown in at the end today. So this is the tomato sauce. This is what we're trying to duplicate. Now, being a prepper, of course, I have a pretty good stockpile of this in my food storage, so I'm all set for a while. You can see, actually, this was a can that we bought back in 2020 that we are just using now. And of course, we were able to continue buying that for 5 more years. So I have a pretty good stockpile, but I know there's a lot of people out there who aren't in that position. So I wanted to do this to help them out and to be prepared for when I do run out of my stash. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And of course, these little cans have a pull top, which is really nice. So I've got my handy dandy multi-can opener that opens cans with no sharp edges. And it also has a thing for the pull tabs as well, which is really handy. You can see this is what it looks like. It's kind of a light orangish reddish color because the red of the tomato powder is being diluted by the starches and the dairy ingredients. And you can see there are some kind of herby bits, some smaller pieces of herbs and chives and garlic and onion that you can see, but it's mostly a smooth powder. So this is what we're trying to emulate. Let's talk really quickly about the line of sauces that Thrive Life had so you can really understand this reverse engineering process. First off, I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you who may not even be familiar with Thrive Life, they were known for incredibly high quality freeze-dried foods that made it easy to cook amazing meals from a shelf-stable pantry, which is why so many people loved their products and were very disappointed to have them disappear when they closed their doors. When they released their collection of sauces over 10 years ago, they were designed to replicate the classic French mother sauces and make those accessible as shelf-stable pantry mixes. These foundational cooking sauces, known as mother sauces, include bechamel, velouté, espagnole, hollandaise, and of course, tomato. These traditional mother sauces are smooth, silky base sauces designed to be used either on their own or turned into any number of other sauces. Most of the sauces, including the tomato, were traditionally thickened with a roux. So this isn't exactly like your typical tomato spaghetti sauce. This is important info to have as we look at the ingredients and the process to understand what we're going for and why. My process for this project was to start by looking at the ingredients list on the original product, which we know goes from most to least prevalent ingredients. And I also looked at the nutritional information, which is going to give us a lot of clues, such as the amounts of sodium, carbs, sugars, and added sugars, and things like that. So here is the original ingredients list. Here are the ingredients. I'm just going to read them off. Like I mentioned, there may be some that some people might balk at, and I am going to go into a little bit more detail about some of the ingredients on this can and some of the ingredients that I'm using a little bit later, so stay tuned for that. But basically, what is the ingredients in this sauce mix are tomato powder, modified food starch, sugar, whey, cream, salt, garlic, onion powder, non-fat dry milk, spices, which it doesn't really tell you what spices it is. That's usually proprietary in recipes like this, carrot powder, dextrose, onion, maltodextrin, chives, natural flavor, red onion, and citric acid. And you can also see the instructions here. So you would slowly whisk a half a cup of mix into 2 cups of hot water. Stir well and simmer to 1 to 2 minutes. So I am going to be trying to get a product that's going to behave the same way, that a half a cup of mix with 2 cups of water is going to make a similar amount of sauce, a similar thickness of sauce, everything like that. And that's really important in this case because this is used as an ingredient in so many recipes. If I have a meal in a jar recipe where I used the original sauce as an ingredient, I want to make sure that if I use my copycat sauce, that it's going to behave the same way, and I'm going to get basically the same result from the recipe that I did from the original mix. Of course, there are several ingredients in this list that are used a lot in commercial applications, but they're not common in home kitchens. And some are ingredients that some folks prefer to avoid for one reason or another. I do find a bit of research goes a long way when it comes to those kind of ingredients. There's a lot of hype out there. You can't believe everything you hear. And I do have most of them at my disposal. But my goal here was to come as close as I could to mimicking the original product as far as taste, texture, and thickening behavior, while also trying to strike a balance between staying true to the original formula and trying to avoid using a long list of uncommon, harder to source, and possibly objectionable ingredients. In other words, I'm not opposed to using any of these ingredients if it seems necessary, but if I can get by without them, I will. Okay, let's get started, and I'm going to show you the winning recipe that I came up with. So I'm going to get started, and I've got my batter bowl here. I'm going to use this to mix my batch just because it has the pour spout, and I'm hoping that that will make it a little bit easier to get it out of this when I need to, as opposed to just a regular mixing bowl. My first ingredient, of course, is tomato powder. Now, I'm actually using Thrive Life tomato powder because I have a ton of this left over, and obviously you can't get that anymore, but it's basically just dried powdered tomatoes. There's no other ingredients except for tomatoes. So you can use any good quality tomato powder that you can get your hands on, look for one that has no additives, anything like that. Look for one that's just tomatoes. I will put a couple of sources down in the description below the video so that you can find one that works for you where you want to shop. So I'm starting with tomato powder. Now, as long as you store your tomato powder in an airtight jar, it shouldn't get clumps. Don't let moisture get into it. But if you do get little clumps in there like this, they can be easily broken up just by whisking it with a little whisk. Because Thrive Life didn't use any additives in their tomato powder, and I'm sure this is true with any other company that doesn't use additives, it can tend to cake. So they had put theirs on clearance because it had clumps, but I just opened the can up and it very easily runs through a wire mesh strainer like this. So this is 3 pieces. It's got the wide mouth funnel, it's got the regular mouth funnel, and it's got the wire mesh strainer that sets right inside of these, which is perfect. That's going to work perfectly to get this can of tomato powder into a jar, a mason jar, which is the best way to store it once it's open, just to keep it from getting moisture to it. Now, as it comes in this jar, this can, this is a number 10 can, so this is like a gallon size. These were put on clearance just because they do kind of harden in the can, but not the same way that they would if they got moisture to them once they're open. They come apart very easily, and that's what I use the wire mesh strainer for. This is the only way to open these number 10 cans. It makes it so fast and easy. I really struggle with them with a regular can opener. This one makes it so easy. So actually, this one seemed to have escaped the worst of the clumping. I'm going to go ahead and put this into a half-gallon jar because this is probably going to be too much for a quart. So I'll use my wide mouth funnel and the mesh strainer insert. All right, so there are a few clumps in there that you can see. So we will do this. And just something to rub it through is all it really needs. It powders beautifully. I think I may leave this, it's not all the way full, but I'm going to move on to a different jar just because if I need to reach in here and scoop and measure, if I fill this right up to the top, I'm going to have a hard time with that. So I'm just going to wipe off this rim, make sure there's no powder that's going to affect the seal or allow any kind of moisture in, because that is something you really need to keep away from this tomato powder. So one jar ready to go. The rest of this might fit into a quart jar. I am not sure, but I'm going to give it a try. All right, there's our tomato powder all ready to use in any recipe that we need it in. I'm just going to get this sealed up as well, and we're going to get started. Now, I actually have my tomato powder measured out already because I couldn't fit my measuring cup into my mason jar, my big one, so I had to get a little creative. So I've got 1.5 cups of tomato powder here that's going in, 1.5 cups of pure tomato powder. My next ingredient is going to be instant clear gel. Now, I'm using Hoosier Hill Farms, and I definitely recommend using Hoosier Hill Farms. I tried this with a different brand of basically the same thing, and I did not get the same result. Now, this instant clear gel is a modified food starch. So this is what we are using for the modified food starch in the recipe. Now, let's talk for a minute about exactly what that means. Modified starch is just starch, usually from corn or tapioca, that has been processed so that it kind of behaves better in cooking. In the case of the one that we're using today, it's basically been pre-cooked so that it's going to thicken instantly when it gets into liquid, and you don't need to boil it or cook it the way that you would with like cornstarch or flour. So just the same way that like minute rice or instant beans have been cooked first and then dried so that they soak up the water basically instantly and they're ready to eat with little to no cooking. That's something that we're all familiar with, that concept. This is the kind of thing that's used in like instant or no cook puddings, for instance. And that's why you can make those just by mixing them into cold milk. This modified starch, it has other benefits as well. Sauces that are made with it are going to be smoother, silkier, more stable. They can withstand higher heat, longer standing periods, even freezing and thawing without breaking down, separating, or becoming watery. And it also has longer shelf stability in dry mixes. All of these factors actually make it perfect for emergency and preparedness purposes. And I'm using 1 cup plus 1 tablespoon of the instant clear gel. So I've got 1/2 cup. There's 1 cup and a tablespoon. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I don't recommend trying to do this with equal measurements of cornstarch and making it just a cook sauce, one that has to be cooked and doesn't work when it's not cooked. Just because I did test it with cornstarch and I did not get the same results. I did not get the same thickening results with the same measurements. So this is what's working perfectly. And it's really handy to be able to do it without the heating. I mean, normally you would cook your sauce, but if it is like a teenager or somebody making just 1 serving of pasta, for instance, and they just need sauce for 1 serving, it's a whole lot easier to just mix up 1 serving in a bowl with some hot water and not cook it and just let the heat of the pasta warm the sauce and not have to get out an extra pot or anything like that just to cook up 1 little serving of sauce. Next ingredient is sugar. I'm using 1/4 cup of sugar. I've already got it measured out here into this little prep cup. I love these because they do have measurements on the side and they have lids, so they're really great for like putting ingredients in the fridge if you chop things up ahead of time, like you do it in the morning when you've got to make dinner in a hurry in the evening. They're super handy for lots of things. I love them. So that was 1/4 cup of sugar. Next, I'm using heavy cream powder, and I am using 3 tablespoons of the heavy cream powder. There's 1. I will have a link to the heavy cream powder that I use down below, as well as all the ingredients, especially the more difficult to find ones. 2, 3 tablespoons of the heavy cream powder. That is our dairy component, and the dairy is going to help to kind of cut the acidity of the tomato and balance the flavors out a little bit. It also adds a little bit of sweetness as well. Next, I'm using freeze-dried minced garlic. This has such a good sharp garlic flavor. It is wonderful. I'm using 2 tablespoons of the garlic, so there's 1 tablespoon and 2 tablespoons. Next, I'm using some freeze-dried red onion because there is red onion in our sauce, and this is a really wonderful ingredient that is very versatile. A lot of people are just discovering this product and really loving it. It is great for a lot of things. So I got a big can of it, putting it in my sauce, and that was 2 tablespoons of the red onion. And next, I'm also using some freeze-dried chives. So there's our 2 tablespoons of chives. Now I'm adding salt. I'm adding 1.5 tablespoons of the salt. So there's a tablespoon and 1/2 tablespoon. So 1.5 tablespoons of salt. Now that seems like a lot of salt, but remember this is for multiple batches, multiple batches of sauce. I'm using Italian seasoning. So I'm using a tablespoon of the Italian seasoning. Now you could adjust this amount. If you knew you were only going to use this for like an Italian spaghetti type of sauce, you could double this. I would double it probably. However, this is supposed to be a basic sauce that can be flavored lots of different ways. So you could turn this into an enchilada sauce by adding some chili powder. You could turn it into a chili base. You could turn it into sloppy joes. You could turn it into a whole bunch of different things if it's very kind of basic. So this is a good amount to keep it a basic sauce. There's not a strong Italian seasoning flavor in the original sauce that we're trying to emulate. So in an Italian recipe where I had used that sauce, I probably have added some additional Italian seasoning. So I'm going to try to keep this exactly like this. I'm also using some onion powder, a tablespoon of onion powder, and also garlic powder, a tablespoon of the garlic powder. And next I'm using some carrot juice powder. Remember there was carrot powder in the sauce. It's pretty common to add carrot into a tomato-based sauce like this to give it a little bit of additional sweetness to balance out the acidity of the tomatoes. This is actually carrot juice powder, not carrot powder. I have both and I've tasted both and I've worked with both, and I just kind of prefer the way that the carrot juice powder performs and tastes. They're almost the same though, so whichever you have you can use. One thing I don't recommend is trying to powder your dehydrated carrots. I have tried that and it did not work well. I did not get a product that I would recommend using. So I've never tried powdering my freeze-dried carrots. If you have freeze-dried carrots, you might be able to powder those. But at that point, I just gave up and decided it was just worthwhile to just buy the carrot powder and the carrot juice powder. And it's such a nice, fine, powdery product. And of course, you use such a small amount that I think it's really worth having on hand. And that was also 1 tablespoon of the carrot juice powder. Next, I'm adding a couple of ingredients that are a little less common in your typical kitchen. One is citric acid, also known as sour salt. I do always have citric acid in my kitchen. I have for a long time. Sometimes people get weirded out when they hear, something with the word acid, but it's a natural product. It comes from citrus fruits, and it basically just gives a little bit of tartness, and this is going to really help the tomato flavor to pop. And it's used in a lot of different recipes and things like that, and it is used in the original sauce. It just looks like this. It kind of looks like salt or sugar, and it's a pretty potent ingredient, so we don't use a ton of it, but I'm going to be using 1.5 teaspoons. So there's 1 teaspoon and 1/2. And the other thing I'm using is yeast extract. This is another natural product. It's derived from yeast, basically like what you would bake bread with. And it gives a really good umami flavor, that kind of sort of savory richness that, is so common. And it's a good replacement for MSG. If there's a recipe that uses MSG and you are trying to avoid MSG, for some reason that MSG was not in this original recipe. But it does have yeast extract in it. And so that's the purpose of that, is to give it that rich umami flavor. If you have nutritional yeast, you could use that in place of this if you didn't want to go out and get the yeast extract. I actually got this from Firehouse Flavors, which is one of my absolute most favorite stores for buying so many different ingredients, powders, powdered condiments, seasonings. It's amazing. I'll put a link down below for you to check it out if you do want to get something like this, or if you have nutritional yeast, I think you could use that and it would be very similar, especially if you powdered it before you measured it. It would be very similar. And I'm using also 1.5 teaspoons of the yeast extract. So that's it. Those are all the ingredients that are going into our sauce mix. Now we're going to whisk this up. I'm going to get all of these powders blended and combined together. Let's bring that tomato powder up so we see the redness that we need. I am going to do one more blending step after this, but I'm just going to start by getting everything combined basically to begin with. You can see this is starting to look like our powder here. Now the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to put this through my food processor and pulse it a little bit, chop it a little bit. I do want to make some of those herby bits, garlic, onions, chives, spices, a little bit smaller because they're a little more noticeable in my mix than they are in the original mix. And it'll also help to break up any clumps that I may have had in my heavy cream powder or anything else, my tomato powder. If you don't want to blend it, if you don't mind the chunks and you don't want to blend it, somehow either a blender or a food processor works best for me. I've tried it in a blender and it didn't get the chunks out as much as I wanted. If you don't want to do that, you might want to consider putting some of your ingredients through a wire mesh strainer as you put them in if you do have any clumps. And once they get mixed up like this, they probably won't clump again because that starch, that modified food starch, that clear gel is going to sort of make everything stay more free-flowing. But I'm going to get the food processor and give this a little bit of a blitz. All right, so I've got my mix in my food processor. Get the lid on and get this into the stand. That's looking pretty good. It's okay to have some little bits still in there because we do in the original sauce, but I wanted to get some of the bigger chunks kind of chopped up. So now I'm going to get this back into the original mixing bowl just to give it one last blend because you can see it kind of brings up some of the powders a little bit separately when I do this. All right, so now once again, I am just going to give this a little bit more of a mix. And now it is ready to go. I am going to be putting this into a quart-sized jar. This should just about fill the quart jar, not quite. I think it's just under 4 cups. But Thrive Life's mix, of course, came in a pantry can, which is about quart jar size. I am going to use a funnel for this, so hopefully I don't make too much of a mess. I like this funnel because I think it's a little bit wider than the cheap plastic ones that I have that I usually use for my meals in a jar. All right, there we go. That gives me just what I expected, just what I wanted, about a quart jar full. And here is our tomato sauce mix. Now let's give it a side-by-side test. There are 2 tests I want to do here, and one is the cold test and one is the cook test. So it's about a 1-to-4 ratio of mix to water to make this sauce. It was a 1/2 cup of mix, remember, to 2 cups of water. So I'm going to do a small batch for the cold test. I'm actually going to use hot water because it calls for hot water on the can instructions, or warm water. That's kind of another benefit that I forgot to mention about these modified food starches is usually they will blend a lot better even into hot liquid than they will, than something else like flour or cornstarch that would tend to clump if you try to put it into hot liquid, and you really need to blend it with the cold liquid first. So that's another benefit of these mixes and these powders. So I did get cold water is what I'm going to start with. And I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of mix to 4 tablespoons of water to do these. So there's 1 tablespoon of our mix. Got a clean spoon, and I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of this mix. Got a mini whisk to use, and I'm just going to mix up one at a time. It's just going to be easier. So I've got my 4 tablespoons of water here. Just start mixing a little bit. And you see it does start to thicken pretty quickly. You can see that thickening and kind of moistening the starches get saturated so it gets to be a little bit of a deeper color. And now I've got another 1/4 cup of cold water for this one. Start mixing this one up. Once again, this one is also thickening up pretty quickly, and you can see those kind of lighter bits melting away. And we are getting our sauce. And it is a good idea to let these set and kind of bloom for about 5 minutes or so they can fully thicken and those flavors can all combine. Super, super, super close. You can see they look about the same thickness, the same consistency. Perfect. Now we're going to do the cook test. For the cook test, I am going to be doing a 1/4 cup of the sauce mix. So this is the homemade sauce mix. I've got a 1/4 cup of that. And I'm using 1 cup of water for this much. And I've got my sauce whisk here. I love this whisk. It is designed to get into the corners of the pot so you don't end up with those clumps of dry mix in the corners, which I always do. I'm going to get the heat on. This is going to thicken up without the heat. We know that. But we are going to put the heat on and cook it. So this whisk gets into all the cracks and crevices of the pan, and I thought I would be okay. I'm doing such a small batch. When I did a test batch, I used one of my really small whisks like this, and I thought that would be okay to get into the corners of the pan, and I still had clumps. But you can see this gets right into the corners, every corner. It's easy to hold, it's easy to operate, and it's coated with, I don't know, silicone or something so it doesn't scratch up your pans. Not that it would scratch a stainless steel, but if you do have non-stick coated or ceramic coated or whatever you may have. So you can see this is already thick, but I'm going to keep going until it just starts to simmer. And then that's going to be our test. And this is going to happen really quickly because these stoves are pretty powerful. This is a butane stove, really inexpensive. I feel like everyone should have one. They're inexpensive, they're easy to store, and you have a simple way to cook, heat food, boil water, all of the things. And from my research, I feel perfectly comfortable using it indoors, although I always recommend, obviously, having carbon monoxide detectors anytime you're using any kind of an appliance in your house. It's starting to bubble. You can't really see it because I'm whisking, but see? There it goes. I'm going to keep whisking because I don't want to get splashed. But that's definitely enough to call a simmer. So now we've got the cooked sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and pour this off into a little prep bowl so that I can use the same pot to cook the actual Thrive sauce. So you can see that makes just over a cup of sauce because these are 1 cup prep bowls and this is mounded up over the top. And that kind of also shows you how nice and thick the sauce comes out because it's not overflowing over the sides, even though I do have it mounded up there pretty high. All right, I'm going to set this aside and get working on the other sauce so we can compare. All right, so now we're going to do the Thrive Original sauce mix that we were trying to duplicate. Once again, a 1/4 cup of mix, and I am doing 1 cup of cold water, getting the heat on, getting this whisked in with my sauce whisk. Thickening, thickening. And you notice it does darken as it cooks a little bit, or deepens the color, I guess I would say. The cooked version is going to have a little bit deeper color than the uncooked mixture. We are starting to bubble. I'm going to let it go just a tad longer. All right, there it goes. And once again, we've got the same thickness and the same basically the same amount of sauce. The same yield of the finished sauce. Now this one, of course, has been cooling a little bit longer because I cooked it first. So this was the homemade on the right and the Thrive Life Original on the left. I'm going to let them both cool off so that they're both about the same temperature, and then we'll check out how similar they are. All right, so here they are. This is the original sauce and this is the homemade version. They are very close in looks. They're very close in thickness and texture. I think this one is a little bit deeper in color. And Mine still has a little bit more chunks, it appears. But let's do the taste test and see. I'm going to taste the original. Okay. Now I'm going to taste my copy. Wow. That is very, very close. Very close. That is definitely going to do the trick. I'm calling this a success. Making things from scratch can be very satisfying, but honestly, sometimes I just want or need to buy it instead. We are working closely with one of our partner companies. We're trying to bring back a commercial tomato sauce mix, just like the one that we lost. No guarantees yet, but I have got my fingers crossed. If you want to know if and when that does happen, you're going to want to make sure that you're on my alerts list. Just text alert to my number that you see on your screen, and you'll get occasional messages from me when there are sales, discount codes, or new product releases in the freeze-dried food world. And you'll definitely get one if we get the tomato sauce back. You can also join my insiders list by texting insider to that same number, if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to miss a single thing and doesn't mind getting slightly more frequent messages from me. This tomato sauce mix has so many uses. It's perfect for meal in a jar recipes. You can find a whole bunch of those at wickedprepared.com and in my Jara's Meals in Jars Facebook group. One of the things I love most is the flexibility. You can make a little or a lot depending on what you need that day. And it's not just for pasta. You can use it for pizza sauce. If you mix it thicker, you can add it to meat sauce, goulash, chili, sloppy joes, even soups. Once you start using it as a base and adjusting the seasonings, the possibilities are pretty much endless. You can even add cream or white sauce to turn it into a creamy tomato sauce. But if you really want creamy, next I'm going to show you how to make a rich, garlicky Alfredo sauce mix. And honestly, this one surprised me a little because I used one tiny ingredient that made a huge difference, and it turned out better than any other Alfredo sauce mix I've ever tried. Before I get started, let's stop the debate right here. This won't be a historically authentic recipe. True traditional fettuccine Alfredo is an extremely simple creation of butter, Parmesan, and starchy pasta water. What most of us know today, American restaurant Alfredo, has evolved into something a little bit different, including garlic, cream, and sometimes cream cheese or roux for stability. This is the sauce that I'm trying to recreate with a few tweaks to make it instant, easy, and shelf stable. Let's get started. I'm going to mix the Alfredo up the same way. And I'm starting with some instant milk powder. Now, this is different than your non-fat dry milk. This is a different product. This is instant milk. So this is what you want. They have different measurements, different behaviors, different flavors, all of that. And I'm using 1 cup of the instant milk. Now, just like anything else that I store, if I am going to store an ingredient that I use in recipes, I'm going to make sure it's one that tastes good, that I enjoy eating or drinking as well. So I'm not having to store 2 separate things. I will have a link to this instant milk down in the description, just like all the other ingredients, because we did have to find a replacement for the best tasting instant milk when Thrive Life closed their doors. And next, of course, I'm using some Parmesan cheese powder. Now, this is not the same as the grated Parmesan cheese in the shaker container that you get in the grocery store. You can see this is very fine and powdery. It's more the texture of like flour than it is the texture of that Parmesan cheese. So this is going to keep the sauce smoother. It's going to dissolve better and kind of mix into the sauce better and kind of reduce that risk that you get with those shaker Parmesan cheese of getting oily, gloopy, kind of clumpy sauces. So this is going to make a much smoother sauce. It's also going to have a much longer shelf life at room temperature than that Parmesan shaker cheese. Another thing about the store-bought Parmesan shaker cheese is they usually contain cellulose in their ingredients. And that's what people are talking about when they say they put sawdust in your cheese to keep it from clumping together. So cellulose does come often from wood fibers. I do think it's one of those ingredients where a little bit of research and education goes a long way. Rather than just following like the hype, but a lot of people do try to avoid it. So that is another benefit of using the Parmesan cheese powder. I'm using 1 cup of the Parmesan cheese powder also. And next I'm using something that's not really traditional, but it is in a lot of Alfredo sauces, is cream cheese powder. Well, cream cheese powder may not be, but cream cheese. A lot of people use cream cheese in their Alfredo. Some restaurants do as well. This is going to help keep the sauce smooth, help keep it from separating, things like that. It adds a nice creaminess and a nice tang, and I really like what it lends to the sauce. It's kind of going to take the place of some of the heavy cream that would be in a traditional Alfredo sauce, and it's going to just give it a better flavor than using a whole lot of heavy cream powder in this. Now this is Judy's brand cream cheese powder. Actually, the Parmesan cheese powder is Judy's as well. I've been using a lot of Judy's lately. They work really well. They taste really good. So I'm using 1 cup of the cream cheese powder. I've also used cream cheese powder from Firehouse Flavors and had really good results with that as well. I haven't used it in this recipe, but I've used it in other recipes. Now, I said the cream cheese powder would work better than using a whole lot of heavy cream powder in this recipe, but we are using some. I'm using a 1/2 cup of the heavy cream powder. I'm also using a 1/2 cup of butter powder, 1/2 cup of butter powder, and I'm also using a 1/2 cup of this instant clear gel. Now, this is where I made the choice to use the instant clear gel because I did think that that element of being able to mix the sauce up cold without having to cook it. You know, you have the option to cook it, but you don't have to. That was so handy with the tomato sauce that I decided, why would I take that away and formulate this sauce with cornstarch, which would have to be cooked. So a 1/2 cup of the instant clear gel. Next, I'm adding my freeze-dried minced garlic. Just like the tomato sauce, this is going to have both the freeze-dried garlic and the garlic powder. They're both very different. Freeze-dried is much more like fresh garlic, and you know how fresh garlic is very different than like garlic powder. They're just kind of a different animal. So they both give a different element to the sauce, and it's going to give it a lot of depth. So there's 1 tablespoon of the freeze-dried minced and 2 tablespoons. Like our Alfredo sauce, nice and garlicky. Of course, if you are allergic to garlic or you don't care for garlic, you can cut down or increase any of the ingredients. That's the beauty of making your own mixes and making things from scratch, is you get to make it your own. You can make adjustments, do it however you want, and do it to your family's taste. I always try a recipe once the way it's written, and then decide after that if I want to make any changes. And next, I'm going to add my salt. I'm adding 2 teaspoons of salt. And while I've got this out, I might as well add my pepper as well. I'm adding 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. I see a lot of Alfredo recipes that call for white pepper, and I think it's probably so it will blend in with the sauce, but I actually like the flecks of black pepper in my Alfredo. We always put pepper on our Alfredo, so I'm using black pepper, but if you prefer to use white pepper, then you can go ahead and use white pepper and it won't make a difference. I'm using some garlic powder. Now this, of course, is in addition to the freeze-dried minced garlic. They're 2 kind of different things that are each going to add different elements to this. The freeze-dried minced garlic is much more like fresh garlic, which is very different from garlic powder. So they're going to add 2 different kind of nuances to the sauce. I used a teaspoon of the garlic powder. I'm also adding some onion powder, just a little bit of onion powder. Onion is not traditional to Alfredo sauce, but this is going to add just a little bit of depth to this sauce. It's kind of like an undernote. That was a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder. And then I've got my final 2 ingredients. I've got my yeast extract. Now, yeast extract, and especially nutritional yeast, are often known to be like cheese substitutes, like vegan cheese substitutes. They give a very cheesy sort of vibe. So this is going to add to the cheesiness of this dish, this yeast extract. If you don't have this and you do have nutritional yeast, I'm sure you could use the nutritional yeast, especially if you blended it up into a finer powder before you added it, before you measured it. I used a 1/2 teaspoon of the yeast extract. And then my final ingredient in this recipe is lactic acid. So this is a little bit different than the citric acid. This occurs naturally in foods. It can come from dairy foods. That's why it's called lactic acid. But it is kind of what gives things like yogurt, cheese, and sourdough bread its tartness. It's a little tangy, that little tangy touch that it's got. So this is going to help brighten up this dish and make it taste a lot more cheesy. This is a trick that's often used in a lot of commercial dishes to make them taste more cheesy. So that was a 1/2 teaspoon of the lactic acid. And that is everything we need in our Alfredo sauce mix. Now I'm just going to go ahead and mix this up and get all these ingredients combined. And once again, I'm going to be putting this into a wide mouth quart mason jar. It's just about enough for a quart jar. It might be slightly too much, but we are going to mix up a batch. So if it's too much, I'll just use some of the extra for the batch I'm going to mix up. All right, let's get this in here. So this is slightly too much, ever so slightly too much for the quart jar because it's pretty darn full and I've got a little bit of mix left. So we'll use this to mix up the test batches. But this jar is ready to store on the shelf. Now, of course, this sauce, I don't have anything I was trying to copycat. So I'm not mixing up two batches. I'm just mixing up one just to test out how this one came out and to show you how this came out. I am going to do it the same way though. I'm going to do a batch that's uncooked and a batch that's cooked so you can see the difference or see how they each work. This one is a different ratio of mix though. This is not 1 part mix to 4 parts water. It is 3 parts mix to 4 parts water. So we're going to need 3 tablespoons of the mix. This is for the uncooked batch. So there's our 3 tablespoons of mix. And I am mixing that with 4 tablespoons of water, which is the same as a 1/4 cup. All right, let's give this a mix to get this all blended. I just love these little teeny whisks. I got these recently because I really wanted some. I remembered my grandmother having one that said something. It was a promotional thing. It said French's on it or some brand. Probably came with something that was like a seasoning kind of recipe or something. But so I got a couple sets of mini whisks recently and I've been using them a lot for things like this. But you can see how nice and thick this is mixing up even without having to cook it. Once again, we can let this set for just a few minutes for the flavors to blend and then I'm going to give it a taste. All right, let's give this a taste. Look at how thick and creamy that is. If you can tell how thick and beautiful, luscious that sauce is without even having to cook it or put it on the heat. And I give it a taste. Very, very good. Yummy, yummy Alfredo. That is delicious. Besides single servings of pasta, this would be really handy if you wanted to make like a chicken Alfredo pizza or something like that. You know, just whip up enough sauce and not have to cook it because it's going to get cooked on the pizza. So instead of having to waste that extra pot, it's another good use for this. Now let's try the cooked version. All right, so for the cooked Alfredo, this is going to go pretty much the same way as the tomato sauce, except the ratio is different. So I'm using 3 parts of mix to 4 parts of water. So we've got 3/4 of a cup of the mix to my 1 cup of water. Once again, this is going to start thickening right away because it uses that instant thickener, but I am going to cook this. Just going to get it all mixed in first. Now I'm going to get the heat on. All right, this one is starting to bubble. There it goes, bubble, bubble, bubble. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off. Remove it from the heat here. It's nice and thick. And I'm going to let this cool a little bit and we'll give it a taste test. Look at that beautiful, thick Alfredo sauce. Here it is, thick, luscious Alfredo sauce. Look at that. It looks amazing. Let's see how it tastes. So good. So yummy. Garlicky, creamy, and rich. This is the perfect mix to have on your shelf. These are 2 mixes that will become staples in your pantry and make your life easier on a regular basis. All right, I promised you a bonus recipe, and I'm going to deliver on that with a garlic bread seasoning mix for your pantry. This is a real simple recipe. I'm starting with my bowl. I've just got a few ingredients to put in. You can make garlic bread seasoning all different kinds of ways. Some people put cheese in it. Some people put different herbs in it. I am making a very simple version this time, and I'm starting with some parsley flakes. You can do dried parsley or you could do freeze-dried parsley. I'm using this dried today. I'm going to use 1/2 cup. So I've got my 1/2 cup of parsley flakes. Next, I'm adding my freeze-dried minced garlic. I'm adding 6 tablespoons. So this is a 2 tablespoon scoop. So I'm going to add 3 of these. Not completely emptied my little 3/4 pint jar of garlic, but luckily I have got more. Next, I'm going to be adding some garlic powder. So having both the freeze-dried minced garlic, which is very similar to grated or chopped fresh garlic, and the garlic powder is going to give a fully rounded flavor that's all perfectly garlicky. So I'm using 4 teaspoons of the garlic powder and 4. And finally, I'm using salt, just a teaspoon of salt in this recipe. Now, of course, there's also salt in the butter. So if you don't like salt or you have to be on a low salt diet, you could leave the salt out. It doesn't make it very salty. This is multiple batches, makes multiple big loaves of bread. So we like the salt in it, but that can be something that you can try out for yourself and decide what you do or don't want. Now I'm just going to mix this together as best I can, trying to get these powders incorporated, the salt and the garlic powder. And now I'm just going to transfer this into a container. So I've got I don't know what size this is, but I know that it's going to fit in here because I've done this before. So I've got my container and I'm just going to transfer my garlic bread seasoning into my jar. I'm making sure to scrape all this garlic powder out of this bowl and get it right in there because the garlic powder is very fine. At least the one I'm using is very fine and it is sticking to the bowl. And that's it. Now we've got our seasoning all complete. To use this, all you need to do is take about 4 tablespoons, which is 1/4 cup. That's how much I like per 1 stick of butter. So if you have a big loaf of French bread, you're going to use 1 softened stick of butter and 1/4 cup of this seasoning mix. That's what I like. If that's too strong for you, you could always use less, or you could definitely use more, but I think I wouldn't go much higher than that because we are garlic lovers. So what I do like to do though, before I use this every time, is just give it a shake because it has the fine powders like the garlic powder and the salt, and it has the chunkier pieces, the parsley and the minced garlic. So the powders can tend to sink down to the bottom a little bit so I like to give it a shake and make sure that I'm scooping down to the bottom when I do take a scoop out. You can kind of see if you're getting the powders and everything in there. So I like to give it a shake and do that before I use it every time. Now let me show you how we're going to make a little bit of garlic bread with this seasoning. All right, so I've got my softened butter here that started mashing. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and add my seasoning. So like I mentioned, I'm going to give it a little shake it all up, and I'm going to use my 1/8 cup scoop, and I'm just going to scoop twice. So I've got 1, 2, and now just to mash this into the butter until it's all uniform. The other thing you can do, I have done this, sometimes I do this, you can scoop the seasoning mix into a small dish or even this dish before I put the butter into it, and you can put 2 tablespoons of just cold water on it and let the herbs and the garlic sort of rehydrate before you mix it. I actually learned something interesting recently that said that when garlic is dried, like at least with garlic powder, I'm not sure about freeze-dried garlic, but with garlic powder, the 2 compounds that give garlic its flavor are sort of inactivated. And so adding some moisture, some water back into them reactivates that. So you're going to have that good garlic flavor again. So I have done that with this. I have added 2 tablespoons of water to my 4 tablespoons of seasonings and let that set for about 5-10 minutes and then mixed it into the butter. But regardless, once you mix it into the butter, you're going to want to let it set for at least about 10 minutes just to let all the flavors kind of blend together. And then we're going to spread it on our bread. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and spread my butter spread on some pieces of French bread, Italian bread, whatever kind of bread you want to use, whatever kind of bread this is. Give it a generous spread, but not too much. 1 stick of butter should do a full loaf of bread split in half down the middle, or however you want to do it. You could make slices, traditional slices, and do it that way. My mother used to take the loaf and slice it into slices and not quite slice all the way through, and then she would lay it on a sheet of foil and spread the inside of those cuts with the garlic butter, and then she would wrap it all up in the foil and bake it all together in one. So that was how I had it when I was a kid, but I prefer it to be crispy. I like the crispiness, so that's how we do it. Most people, I think, do it as each individual slice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these into the oven. I'm only making a couple pieces right now because we don't need to eat that much garlic bread right now. But that's the good thing about this. I'm going to put the rest of this spread into the refrigerator, and I can use it anytime we need some garlic bread. And also, by the same note, you could also just take, 2 tablespoons of butter softened and put 1 tablespoon of mix into it, or however much your taste prefer. And you could just make a little bit of butter at a time to just put on a few slices of bread if that was all you needed. So once again, it's really, really good to be able to have the flexibility to make exactly how much you want when you need it. I'm putting these in at 400 on a baking sheet that I've lined with parchment paper, and they're going to go, it's usually about between 5 to 10 minutes. Mine usually go 6 or 7. Start watching them really well at 5 minutes, because if they go too far, you're going to get it really browned, and you don't want that. So anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes probably depends on your oven and things like that. So I will see you back here when these are done. All right, here is our beautiful garlic bread. Now, just to show you the difference, I did 2 with the butter that we just mixed up, these 2 right here. And I did 2 with butter where I had rehydrated the seasoning mixture before I mixed it with the butter. So you can see that the garlic browns more quickly on the ones that weren't rehydrated first, where the seasoning was just mixed directly into the butter. So that's the difference. You can do it either way, and they are both crispy and delicious and absolutely wonderful. So good. I have a weakness for garlic bread. And now you've got delicious garlic bread to go with your pasta dinner. Don't forget to check out all the resources that I've listed below for help in locating things. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, because we've always got new content coming out. And check out our website and our channel playlists for a whole collection of shelf-stable pantry recipes like these. If you're a person who always looks for a better way, not only in the kitchen, but in everything you do, check out shopabetterway.com and check down below for a special opportunity to work with us. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a tomato emoji down in the comments, and check out this video next to find recipes for 3 more mother sauce mixes. I'm Jera with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.